Hello, focused learners, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're exploring a deeply fascinating concept called the architecture of emotional decision-making. It's a title that implies there's an actual structure out there, like a hidden blueprint, behind exactly how our feelings govern our actions. We're going straight to the source today to unpack the complex mechanics of our own minds and try to understand exactly why we do what we do.
So why do emotions hijack our decisions? Think about it. Think about the last time you sent a completely heated email that you immediately regretted the second you hit send. Or maybe you bought something wildly expensive just because you were having a really bad day. In those moments, logic is completely sidelined, right? Well, the biological reality is that emotional processing in the brain actually happens milliseconds faster than cognitive processing. By the time you even start to think about a decision, your emotions have already laid the groundwork. This explainer is going to map out exactly how and why that undeniable impact happens to us every single day.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our source maps out 3 core areas we're going to cover: the development of human emotions, how those emotions relate to decision-making, and finally, the irrational behavior that surfaces during different emotional states.
Section 1. Development of human emotions. Let's look at the origins of our feelings.
To really grasp why we make the choices we do, we first have to understand our biology. You see, evolutionary psychology shows us that the origins of our feelings aren't just arbitrary, they're actually deeply ingrained survival mechanisms. Fear, that kept us safe from predators. Disgust, that kept us from eating toxic food. And as our species evolved, so did our emotional growth. The human brain developed these really complex structures, primarily within the limbic system, which houses the amygdala. Think of the amygdala as our brain's emotional alarm bell. Now, full emotional development happens when this super fast-acting limbic system creates neural pathways that talk to the much newer, much slower part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which handles our logic and reasoning. So this whole biological evolution essentially built a system where our feelings literally have a head start over our rational thought.
Let's move to Section 2, emotion and decision-making, how we make our choices.
When we contrast human emotions with decision-making, we see exactly where our ancient biology clashes with our modern daily lives. We've got our emotions, driven by that incredibly fast instinctual limbic system, basically going head-to-head with our decision-making processes, which rely on that rational prefrontal cortex. And when you're faced with a choice, these two systems, they don't just work in perfect harmony, they actually compete for resources. If you're highly stressed or emotionally worked up, the amygdala essentially overrides the prefrontal cortex altogether. The source text really highlights this friction. Your brain is biologically designed to let emotions take the wheel during critical moments because, historically speaking, hesitation meant danger. It's just an incredibly powerful dynamic where our ancient emotional wiring actively dictates our modern cognitive paths.
Which brings us to Section 3, the pull of irrational behavior. What happens when emotions rule?
So, the crucial point here is understanding the messy, real-world reality of what happens when that biological override occurs. Irrational behavior isn't some weird glitch in our system. It's a completely predictable outcome of emotional arousal. When our feelings dictate our actions, we constantly ignore probabilities, we overlook long-term consequences, and we often act entirely against our own self-interest. Think about the concept of panic selling in the stock market. Objectively, holding on to your investments might be the purely logical choice based on the data, right? But the sheer emotional weight of fear can cause a massive logical override. It prompts people to sell at a devastating loss simply to stop the immediate psychological pain.
And what's truly fascinating is how this irrationality actually fluctuates depending on the specific emotion you're experiencing. Our source points out that we need to closely look at irrational behavior during different emotions because it is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all reaction. Different emotions warp our logic in entirely different directions. Take anger, for example. Anger tends to make us overly confident and hyper-focused on risk-seeking. When you're angry, you're biologically primed to underestimate danger and make really aggressive, impulsive choices. But on the flip side, sadness does the exact opposite. Research indicates that sadness leads to what's called the myopic misery effect. This makes us incredibly risk-averse but highly desperate for immediate, short-term gratification just to soothe the pain, even if it ends up costing us way more in the long run. So the specific emotion you feel fundamentally changes the actual math of your irrational choices.
All of this leaves us with one final, incredibly important question to ponder. How do different emotions drive your irrational choices? Now that we've looked at the underlying biology, the ongoing conflict between your fast limbic system and your slow prefrontal cortex, and how specific states like anger or sadness completely warp your logic, try applying it to yourself. Think about your own recent decisions. Which emotion was quietly sitting in the driver's seat, steering you toward an irrational outcome? By understanding this architecture, we take the very first powerful step toward recognizing our own hidden patterns. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and definitely keep exploring the fascinating mechanics of your own mind.